Wyoming Territory, January 1882. The wind cut like a blade down from the bighorns, sweeping across the high plains and rattling the frost-laced cottonwoods along the Powder River. August Boone pulled his gelding to a stop just outside the split-rail fence that marked the edge of the old Everett place. The homestead looked near abandoned. The barn door hung crooked, smoke barely curled from the chimney, and in the pale morning light, a woman stood by the fence, arms hugged tight around herself, shivering so hard her shoulders trembled. She wore a threadbare shawl, boots caked in snow, and her face was pale, lips blue, but her chin stayed high, eyes fixed on the horizon like she was waiting on something that might never come. August swung down from the saddle, boots crunching in the snow. He tugged his coat tighter and stepped forward. "Darlin, you want a blanket or a husband?" he asked, voice low, half teasing, half serious. The woman blinked, startled, then let out a sound that might have been a laugh or a cough. "You offering both?" she asked, voice hoarse but steady. He shrugged one shoulder, pulling the blanket from his saddlebag and holding it out. "One's immediate, the other's long-term, up to you." She hesitated, then took the blanket, wrapping it around her shoulders. Her hands were red and raw, fingers shaking. "Name's Odessa Everett," she said. "This was my father's land. He passed last spring. I stayed." August nodded. "August Boone. I ride for the 666 ranch just east. Saw the smoke, figured someone was still here." Odessa's jaw tensed. "It's just me and my boy, Zachary. He's 6, been sick near a week now. Fever broke last night, but we lost the cow, no milk, nothing left to feed him but root vegetables and dried beans." August's brow furrowed. "You should have sent word." "To who?" "My brother's headed east after Pa died. I have no one left." She glanced toward the house. "I was hoping maybe someone might pass by." "Well," August said, eyes locked on hers, "someone did." He helped her back to the house, carrying a sack of supplies he kept on the horse for long rides: jerky, flour, dried apples, and 2 tins of condensed milk. Inside, the cabin was cold but tidy. A single fire burned low and a small cot sat near it. Curled in blankets, a boy with dark curls and flushed cheeks stirred and opened his eyes. "Mama," he whispered. Odessa knelt beside him, brushing his hair back. "I'm here, baby." August crouched beside them, setting the milk down. "Zachary, I'm August. Brought you something to help you feel better." The boy gave the faintest nod. August stood and quietly began stacking wood in the fireplace. Odessa watched him, wary but grateful. "You did not have to stop," she said. "I know," he replied. "But I did." She fixed him with a look. "Do you always offer marriage to women you find freezing at fences?" He chuckled softly. "Only once. That night after the fire was stoked high and Zachary slept with color finally returning to his cheeks, August took the cot by the door. Odessa draped an extra quilt over him. Their hands brushed. For a second, neither moved. "You should leave in the morning before the snow gets worse," she said, voice barely above a whisper. August looked up at her. "I could. Or I could fix the barn door, get the woodpile stacked, and make sure Zachary does not get sick again." She stared at him, something shaking behind her eyes. "Why would you do all that?" He sat up, resting his forearms on his knees. "Because I have been riding this land for years, Odessa. I have seen too many people left behind, and I do not believe you deserve to be one of them." She looked away, eyes shining, then nodded once and slipped back toward her bed. August stayed. By the 3rd day, the wind had died and the sun broke through the clouds. August had repaired the barn, hauled water, and even rigged a better chimney flue to draw out the smoke. Zachary followed him everywhere, asking questions about horses and prairie dogs, and whether August had ever shot a grizzly. Odessa watched from the porch, arms crossed, shoulders no longer shaking from cold. She smiled more. She spoke freely. Her cheeks held color again, and her hands no longer trembled. One afternoon, as August nailed the last board into the chicken coop, she brought him a cup of coffee and sat beside him on the log near the fence. "You meant it, did you not?" she asked. He looked at her. "About the blanket?" "No," she said, eyes steady on his. "About the husband?" August set the hammer down. "I do not say things I do not mean. I have not thought about marrying again," she said. "Zachary's father he left when he was 3 months old, rode south and never looked back. I am not him." "No," she said softly. "You are not." He turned to face her. "I am not offering safety out of pity, Odessa. I am offering a life. I want to be here with you, with Zachary." Tears welled in her eyes, but she nodded. "Then stay." He reached out, took her hand, and she did not pull away. That night, after Zachary had been tucked in, Odessa stood by the fire staring into the flames. August stepped behind her, resting a hand on her shoulder. She leaned back against him. "You want to marry me, Odessa Everett?" he asked. She turned in his arms, eyes full of something fierce and bright. "Yes, I do." And in that quiet cabin, with the fire crackling and the snow falling soft outside, she kissed him not out of desperation, not from fear, but because in him she had found warmth that would never fade. And in her he had found home. The snow began to melt in thin rivulets along the southern slope by early February, revealing patches of brittle grass and the dark line of the wagon ruts that led from the main road to the cabin. By then, the boy's cough had faded to nothing more than a sleepy hum in the evenings, and the woodpile reached shoulder height thanks to August's steady work and Odessa's quiet persistence. She had not asked him to stay beyond that first week, not in words, but she didn't need to. Come morning, there was always coffee waiting, his saddle left untouched, and a second plate set beside hers at every meal. When he left for the 666 to check in with the foreman, he returned by dusk without needing to be asked. "That mare of yours," Odessa said one afternoon as they walked the pasture fence to check for breaks. "She favors her left leg. Been that way long?" August adjusted the brim of his hat against the low sun. "Since she tangled with a barbed wire strand near Buffalo 3 summers back. She's steady but favors soft dirt. You ought to keep her off the slope near the creek then. That ground sinks fast come thaw." She bent to test a loose post, her braids swaying over one shoulder. "You ever think about trading her for something younger?" He glanced at her hands, calloused and sure. "She's earned her place. I don't discard what still works." Odessa leaned her weight into the post until it held firm. "No, I don't suppose you do." They walked on, the only sound the scrape of boots over frozen dirt and the distant caw of a raven circling overhead. That evening, while Zachary sketched horses with charcoal on the hearthstone, August sat at the table, bent over a small wooden box. He worked with a pocket knife, carving slow, deliberate strokes. Odessa watched from the stove, drying her hands on a cloth. "Something for the ranch?" she asked. He didn't look up. "Something for him." She stepped closer. The box was rough but solid, the lid fitted snug with a carved horse's head emerging from the grain. "That's kind," she said. "It's not kindness," he replied. He asked what it meant to have a man around. I told him it meant he'd have someone who remembered what he liked. A boy ought to have a place for his treasures. Odessa's breath caught faintly, but she said nothing. She reached for the kettle, poured 2 mugs, and slid one toward him. "He's taken to you. I've taken to him." She sat across from him, fingers wrapped around her cup. The fire flickered low and shadows lengthened across the table. "I've been thinking," she said. "About spring." August looked up. "I'll need to get the garden turned. Chickens will start laying again, but we'll need a second coop if we want to keep them through summer." He nodded. "I'll help with the soil and the coop." "I know," she said softly. They sat quiet for a long while, the kind of silence that didn't press. Then she said, "I found my mother's ring. It was wrapped in an old handkerchief in the bottom of a trunk. I'd forgotten about it." He set down the knife. "You planning to wear it?" "I was thinking," she said, her voice even. "Maybe it should be given proper, with words and witnesses." August's brow lifted slightly. "You mean at the chapel in Casey?" She nodded. "Pastor Miller's still there. He baptized Zachary. He'd do it." August leaned back, the lines around his eyes deepening as his mouth curved. "Then we'll ride in when the road clears. I'll bring the license. You bring the ring." Odessa reached across the table, her hand resting over his. "I never thought I'd want to say vows again." "You don't have to want it," he said, turning his palm to hold hers. "You just have to mean it." She met his gaze. "I do." Outside, the wind had lost its teeth. Snowmelt whispered down the eaves, and the sky blushed with the last light of day. Inside the cabin, the warmth no longer came only from the fire. March brought the thaw in earnest. Ice pulled back from the rivulets behind the barn, the creek ran fast and clear, and the air began to carry the faint scent of wet soil and pine. August hitched the wagon early one morning as frost clung to the grass in fragile lace. Odessa stood beside him with her coat buttoned high and a small tin box tucked beneath her arm. Zachary sat on the bench seat, knees bouncing with quiet energy as he cradled a slingshot August had carved for him from willow. The boy's cough hadn't returned, and his eyes were bright again. He never asked whether August would come back when he rode out anymore. He simply waited by the window until he did. "Ready?" August asked. Odessa looked toward the house, then nodded. "I wrote a letter. I'll leave it with Mrs. Fallow in Casey. In case either of my brothers think to write this year." August helped her up, then climbed in beside her. The trail south cut through open country, winding between bare cottonwoods and dry gulches still patched with snow. They passed 2 elk picking their way across a ridge, and Zachary counted hawks on the fence posts until he lost track. By noon, they reached town. Casey hadn't changed much, still one mercantile, one saloon, and the chapel with its whitewashed steeple catching sunlight like a clean bone. Pastor Miller waited at the steps, coat buttoned and hair swept back. He greeted Odessa with a kind touch to her shoulder and looked August over with a calm, measuring eye. "You found your footing," he said to her. "I've found what held me steady," she replied. Inside, the pews sat empty but for Mrs. Fallow and her husband, who had come at Odessa's request to stand witness. Zachary sat between them, legs swinging. Odessa wore a dress the color of creekstone, and her mother's ring nestled in her palm. August stood beside her in his cleanest shirt, the sleeves mended where they'd once torn on a fence nail. The vows were spoken without hesitation. Odessa's voice held no tremble. August's hand never left hers. When the ring slid into place, it caught the light like it remembered the woman who wore it first. Afterward, at the Fallows' table, they ate stew seasoned with wild onion and thick bread still warm from the oven. Zachary dozed off on a quilt, thumb tucked beneath his chin, and Mrs. Fallow tucked another blanket over him without a word. Later, as dusk pulled shadows long across the prairie, Odessa and August stood outside the chapel, watching the wind ripple across the grass. "I thought I might feel different," she said. "Do you?" "No," she said, then smiled. "I feel right." He drew her to him slow, his hand resting at the curve of her back. She leaned in without hesitation, her forehead against his chest. "Come spring proper," he said, "I'd like to build a new fence line west, give the chickens more space, maybe plant corn." She looked up. "We'll need to mend the plow blade. It's rusted near through." "I'll trade for a new one next ride into Buffalo." She reached for his fingers, lacing hers through. "We'll do it together." They rode home beneath stars that glittered like frost, the wagon creaking soft behind them. Zachary slept against August's side, his hand still clutching the slingshot. Odessa drove steady, her eyes fixed on the road ahead, and the lantern hanging from the wagon's hoop cast a warm circle of light around them. And when they crested the rise just before their cabin came into view, Odessa slowed the horses and let the silence settle between them. "This is our place now," she said. August looked out across the land, the snow gone, the earth ready. "Yes," he said. "It is." The first lambs were born in late April, slick and blinking into the world beneath a pale sky that smelled of rain and thawed grass. Odessa crouched beside the pen, hands gentle and sure, coaxing the last ewe through her labor while August held the lantern steady. The lamb shuddered once, then let out a thin bleat. Odessa wiped its nose with a strip of muslin and placed it against its mother's belly. "Another ewe," she said. "That makes 6 this season." August nodded, eyes scanning the sky. "Storm's coming." "You feel it?" She stood, brushing her skirt clean with both hands. "Pressure's dropped. We've got maybe 2 hours." They got the new lamb settled, then moved through the pasture, coaxing the rest of the flock toward the windbreak behind the barn. Zachary, wrapped in a patched coat and oilskin hat too large for him, ran ahead with a stick, calling out like he'd seen August do. Odessa watched him with a quiet sort of pride, not loud or showy, just the way her shoulders eased when she saw him laughing. Inside the house, they laid extra logs by the hearth and secured the shutters. August checked the roof braces twice before coming in. When the rain hit, it came hard and sudden, a sharp pour that rattled the stovepipe and turned the yard to dark mud. The 3 of them sat at the table eating salt pork and cornmeal biscuits while thunder rolled east over the flats. After supper, August lifted a box from beneath the bed frame and set it on the table. Odessa leaned forward, curious. Inside were 4 books, their covers worn, pages yellowed at the edges. "Found these in Buffalo," August said. "General store had a crate marked for kindling. Thought you'd want to choose before they burned through them." Odessa reached for the top one, a thick volume with a cracked spine. "This one's Emerson. My mother had a copy, but it disappeared after Zachary was born." "I figured you liked words that made you stop and think a while." She looked up. "I do. What about the others?" August shifted the next book forward. "That's a ledger. Blank pages. Thought maybe Zachary could draw in it, or you might want to keep track of spring plantings." Zachary, mouth still sticky with molasses, leaned over the table. "Can I draw horses?" "You can draw whatever you want," August said. Odessa traced the leather corners of the book with her thumb. "I never thought to write things down, but maybe I should. I keep it all in my head, but that doesn't last forever." "You've carried enough in your head," he said. "Let the paper hold some of it." Later, after Zachary had fallen asleep with the ledger open beside him, Odessa stood at the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. August came up behind her, his presence quiet and steady. "I used to think I'd get to a place where everything stopped hurting," she said. "That if I worked hard enough, kept busy enough, it would all go quiet. What changed? I stopped hating the noise. Some of it's grief, sure, but some of it's you and him and the lambs and supper on the table. It's all tangled up now." August rested his hand at the small of her back. "Maybe it's not about getting quiet. Maybe it's about learning which parts to listen to." She turned toward him, her face lit by the lantern glow, and reached for his collar. "You didn't ask me what I'll write first." "What will you write?" She let her forehead rest against his. "That I married a man who came offering a blanket and stayed offering everything else." He didn't answer, not with words. Just kissed her slow and solid, like a man certain of the ground beneath him. Outside, the storm rolled on, but inside the house, It was warm and still and full of the kind of peace that doesn't come easy but stays once it's earned. By late May, the cottonwoods along the creek had leafed out full and green, their branches swaying in the light wind that carried the scent of turned earth and lilac. Odessa stood barefoot in the warm soil behind the cabin, pressing corn seeds into the furrows August had cut earlier that morning. Her skirts were hitched above her ankles, sun catching on her arms, and her face was flushed with the kind of quiet contentment that settled deep and stayed. August leaned on the fence rail beside the garden, watching her work without interrupting. When she reached the end of the row, she looked up. "You going to stand there till the sun drops, or are you planning to help me finish?" He swung his leg over the rail and stepped into the patch. "You had a rhythm going. I wasn't about to spoil it." "Rhythm's no good if we don't beat the heat," she said, brushing a curl from her cheek. "You take the next row." They worked in tandem for the next hour, the garden stretching slowly into order beneath their hands. August moved with practiced ease, but she noticed how he paused now and again to glance toward the edge of the field where Zachary sat on a stump, sharpening a stick with the same care August had taught him. When the last row was planted, Odessa stood and wiped her hands on her apron. "He doesn't know how to call you yet," she said, "but he watches everything you do." August straightened, brushing dirt from his palms. "He'll come to it in his own time. I'm not in a hurry." She studied him a moment, then nodded. He started sleeping through the night again. Good. There was a stretch after his father left when he'd wake up calling for someone, never used a name, just cried out like he hoped someone would answer. August looked toward the boy. "I'll make sure he never has to wonder again." She stepped closer and reached for his hand, her fingers rough from work but steady. "I believe you." That evening, after Zachary had gone to bed with his new carved stick tucked beside him like a sword, Odessa brought out a bundle wrapped in muslin and set it on the table between them. "I found this in my father's chest," she said. "It's a deed. The land goes beyond the ridge. Turns out we've got more than we thought." August unfolded the paper, scanning the survey lines. "You want to run cattle?" "No, but there's a stream back there. Good water. Maybe we build a small smokehouse. I've been thinking about raising hogs." He looked up. "You've been thinking long term." "I have," she said, "because I don't see you leaving and I don't want to plan like you might." He folded the deed and set it aside. "I never planned to stay anywhere. Then I found a place I didn't want to ride away from." She reached across the table, hand clasping his. "Then let's build it, proper, you and me, not just outbuildings and fences, a real life, together." Outside, the last of the light faded to soft blue. Inside, the cabin glowed with lamplight and something quieter, something settled. August rose and pulled a small pouch from his coat pocket. "I traded a saddle blanket for this in town," he said, setting it in her hand. She opened it slowly. A brooch rested inside, silver chased with leafwork, a turquoise stone at the center. "It's beautiful. It's for you, for Sundays, or for when you just want to feel fine." She touched the stone with the tip of her finger. "I never thought I'd feel fine again. Not like this." He drew her close, voice low against her temple. "You're not just fine, Odessa. You're whole. You always were. I just had to see it." She didn't answer with words. Her arms wrapped around him, and the silence that followed was full of everything they didn't need to say. 2 years later, the orchard behind the house bore its first fruit. Just a half-dozen apples, small and tart, but enough to fill the kitchen with the smell of baked sugar and cloves. A new barn stood to the west of the chicken coops, its roof built strong against wind, and 2 spotted hogs rooted lazily in the pen beyond. Zachary had grown taller, his hair a little lighter from the sun, and he'd taken to calling August Pa without ceremony one morning while handing him a pail of nails. No one made a fuss. It stuck. One clear morning in September, Odessa sat on the porch with a shawl draped over her shoulders and a journal open on her lap. She wrote in neat lines, lips moving as she sounded out the words under her breath. August stepped out, wiping his hands on a rag. "Ledger filling up?" he asked. "Page by page," she said. "I wrote about the orchard today." He sat beside her, the warmth of him grounding. "You ever think how far we've come?" she asked. "I do, but I think more about what's ahead." She closed the journal and leaned against him. "Whatever it is, we'll see it through." His arm came around her, anchoring her in the kind of comfort that doesn't falter. And there they stayed, watching the sun crest the ridge, their lives rooted in the land beneath them, in the boy who had stopped crying out in the night, and in the quiet certainty that some things, once found, don't slip away.